I'm Matt Reagan, and I'm a musician living in Chicago with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Now, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a condition that stems from inheriting a faulty gene from one or both of your parents that makes it hard for your body to produce quality collagen. In fact, so hard it's impossible. The gene is faulty. Collagen is the stuff that holds your body together, which includes, cartilage, ligaments, things like that. And so having a problem with your collagen means that your whole body is affected. And it's a spectrum disorder, so there are people who are very, very affected, and there's people who, are not as much. But everyone, you know when you've got it. I'll put it like that. So, as a course of my job, which is as director of music out at Marquette Park, I have to play a lot of instruments to serve the community, right? Including string instruments. Due to the nature of your anatomy, having your collagen affected really affects the makeup of your hands and how things operate in your hands. String instruments, you use your fingers to play them for the most part. Not a great time. However, it is possible to figure out workarounds and solutions based on historically informed approaches, how other people may have done so in the past, even if they didn't have EDS, and through thinking about your body and how to make it do what you want when your body doesn't do what you think it should. So I happen to play guitar and upright and electric bass through the park. And I'll be covering what it's like to play guitar with EDS, approaches that you can use that may increase your mileage with it, and things you can do with bass from a similar sort of perspective. We're going to start on guitar and preface it with a conversation about why we need to make these changes in the first place. So you may be amazed to know or to realize that your fingers have no muscles in them whatsoever. If you look at your wrist, when I move, you can see these little tendons acting. Do you see that? As I roll my fingers, there's stuff moving underneath the surface. Those are the tendons. Tendons roll up through your palm and radiate out to your digits. When that tendon is pulled, that's when that finger contracts in. Now, what is the tendon attached to? The tendon doesn't contract on its own. It's attached to muscles in your forearm, which do the action for you. For example, if I make a fist, you should be able to see all this musculature. It's not very much on me, but all this musculature flex. And that's what is causing your fingers to contract. So, what keeps your fingers in place? Why, of course, your collagen. In EDS, what's affected your collagen. So a lot of folks with the disorder find themselves what is colloquially referred to as double jointed in their fingers. And you can see that happen on me. They call this, I think this is Swan-Neck deformity, where this is maybe where it would stop on an average person, and then whoops, I can keep going, right? Especially in the pinky. It exists over here too, right? So what that means is that a lot of folks who have the disorder have difficulty controlling their left hand technique. Now, why is that? Well, because it's very, very easy to have that swan neck deformity affect your playing. I'm going to do an exercise called the caterpillar. I'm going to distribute the weight, or distribute the force in my fingers so I swan neck the whole way. I'm going to try and get a good angle on it. Hopefully you can see at least the first finger operate. Right? And you can see that if I'm choosing to play like that, where I'm distributing the weight through the fingertip almost, and not the fingertip, but the fingerprint, it becomes very painful very quickly. The kicker is, you're really not supposed to bend like that. And your body knows it. And just because you are bending like that doesn't make it less painful. So what do we do to fix this? You may have seen it already, but what I like to do is almost like you're playing piano. There's a curve in your fingers. Exactly like, I almost think about it like a bridge. One of the bridges that was built in like the 13th or 14th centuries in Europe or something along those lines, or the arch that supports the weight across an entire bridge. If you can figure out a way to communicate the force around your finger as opposed to straight through it, you're going to have a better time. So let's see what that looks like if I can keep a curve in my fingers and still play. Look at this. You see how curved my fingers are? And how it happens to communicate straight through. On fingers 3 and 4, I'm definitely having to lift to show you. But hopefully you can see that. And here's another angle to see it from. And here's what it might look like just from the straight on perspective. Look how different that is as opposed to if I'm not focusing on keeping that arch steady. I can't do it. So keeping that arch steady is really important. Here's another important point. For folks with average hands, you can really get away with playing guitar a lot of different ways. Take a look at Jimi Hendrix's hand. He's wrapping all the way around the instrument so that he can play. Now, there's a reason I don't know any of his chords, and that's because that sort of over-the-top, I guess on this guitar I'll look more like Pat Metheny when I do it, but that over-the-top thing crushes down your hand and keeps certain muscle groups from working. Like we were saying before, the collagen is affected, so the muscle must pick up the slack. Right? So, what I do, and I make sure of this, you see this part in my hand that's kind of flexing? Almost like a little bit half pump there. That little triangle of muscle, it's almost inside the web, right, of the hand. That little triangle of muscle is why I can play string instruments. Because that's what's going to be able to help you hold, that's what gives you the leverage to hold down the strings. Look at this. The angle changes, but that little triangle is always ready to activate. That's how you play lines on guitar, with EDS. Now we're ready to talk about chords. So like we were saying before, right? If you're trying to crush down, if you're trying to crush your hand down, you're going to have a bad time. Because now this side of stuff is really having to pick up the slack. That's tendons going over a very delicate wrist bone structure. And I can already feel it. I would not be able to play guitar like this for more than 20 minutes. It's just not ideal. Instead, you want to keep that thumb there and let that nice triangle of muscle really pick up the slack. And you can see even in the chords, or maybe you can see, even in the chords, I'm not letting my hand crush down at all. I'm not letting the fingertips go down either. Here's a side view. Look at the curve on that. That's how I'm able to play those. If the curve wasn't there, I wouldn't be able to play those chords with the clarity or the quality I could, and anything I would be able to play, I'd have to give up within 15 minutes. But if you can figure out how to keep the curve there, like the arch of a bridge, or maybe even something a little more severe, you can play guitar for a very long time. Now, the question becomes, okay, Matt, you showed us how to do the open chords. That's very well and good. But what happens when someone wants you to play B7? You technically can also play B7 down here. But I'm talking like bar chords. So how do you work up the bar? B-A-R-R-E. For folks who don't know, something you can do on guitar because the frets repeat, every fret is a half step apart, is you can take one chord shape, and as long as you keep it the same, relatively speaking, you can do it all the way up the guitar. Now that being said though, what if you want to do like, because I just did like a D major chord shape up the guitar. What if you want to do this E major shape? Well, I can move this anywhere I want. But the other open strings do not go with me. But sometimes it can make some cool effects, but like sometimes you just want to play like a B major chord and not have to worry about all this extra like fun nonsense. So this is how you work the bar up. Again, making sure you have that nice triangle of muscle. I've been doing it for about maybe 10 minutes now, and I can start feeling that it's waking up for the day, which is pretty wild. But you take that triangle of muscle, and you just focus on getting that pointer finger to lay flat, right? Laid flat across the strings, which is going to work this forearm muscle out a little bit, right? Because you're bringing it in now. Instead of curving it around, which activates the stuff on the other side, you're bringing it in. And maybe you can even see no flex, flex, no flex, flex, right? So something you can do to start working up the bar is I find that unless your guitar is set up very poorly, it can be easier to start the bar at the 10th fret or the 12th. Depends on how many frets you may enjoy on your guitar. I'm going to start this at the 10th. I'm just going up and down, making sure each note rings. If you happen to have one note that's out, uh-oh, then you get to investigate why that's happening. Well, I might not be laying it perfectly flat so that it impacts the G and the B strings in the same way. And then I can fix that. And then you move that shape down the guitar. Right? That is a chord. It's a minor 11 chord. But there are better ways to voice that. That's just an exercise, though. Even down here. And I'm actually having to work a little bit harder to make that work. Down at the first fret. Then what you can do after that is just start applying your normal caged method stuff. And the caged method is like, hey, this particular shape works at one spot on the guitar, we can move it to another spot and it'll come out as a different chord, but I can use the same sort of physical motion, right? So I recommend that people start with an E chord shape, right? Which would be the exact same stuff that you would do for the E chord. You know, if I was down here, that would produce an E chord. I slide that up to the 10th fret, and then I just replace each finger with one finger down. Do you see how I did that? Here's the shape that will become the E chord, and then pointer finger makes the bar. 2, 3, and 4 replace the higher fingers. And you do the exact same exercise. Each note ringing out perfectly. And not skipping any notes if you can help it. And now I can make that B chord without having to worry about notes that don't belong in it appearing. And then you can do all that sort of as well, which is pretty dope. So once you develop that strength and kind of develop that idea of like either the thing is lying perfectly flat to make the bar or it's curved to produce individual distinct notes, even on the lower fingers that are part of a bar chord, you're pretty well set on guitar. The one thing I would say is one of the books I started learning out of was this Mel Bay that is probably like 50 years out of print. And there's photographs of Mel doing stuff like this, where the pointer finger is laid so that it actually is making a Swan-Neck. Try not to do that. It seems pretty silly. There's like voicings in there where like, you know, Mel's asking you to, okay, make a Swan-Neck with your third finger and lay it so that you can get, and find voicings that work for your hand, for crying out loud. Don't, just because such and such a person is doing it and it's working for them, odds are, if you got EDS and you're watching this, your hand does not behave in the same way. So don't do it. There are generally ways to make those voicings happen sans Swan-Neck. For example, one that I can think of off the top of my head that might be easier for certain folks with a Swan-Neck is this major 7 voicing, right? Or that second finger, pardon my manners, produces that is Swan-Necked like that. I can do that, but eventually the collagen on that joint is going to lose its elasticity and I'm going to be SOL. Pardon my French. So instead of that, notice how I'm using these 2 fingers as a way to replace just that middle finger, right? That way I can still get the full voicing. Creative adaptations like that are going to really save your guitar playing long term, I think. Cool. Let's move on to right hand technique on guitar. So you might have picked up on this already, but I really don't like using a pick. If I do use one, it's pretty darn thick because I hate the sensation of the pick bending and also my fingers bending. I don't like that very much at all. But I find that when I use the pick for a prolonged period of time, I'm putting a lot of lateral force on my finger. See it bend out of the way like that? That really hurts after a while. So I will use the pick when I teach, absolutely, because most of the students that I teach don't have this problem. It would be pretty weird if they did. And they need to know how to use a pick. But for my purposes, what I like to do is do the old West Montgomery thumb or finger pick, right? When I say Wes Montgomery thumb, I'm referring to a specific musician who lived in Indianapolis, Indiana for a while, and then moved out to New York. And with Wes's thumb, he got in the habit because he was trying to play quiet. He had like over 5 kids, I think 7. And he didn't want to be very loud when he practiced late at night. He used an arch top like this one, which is the big reason why I got an arch top, because I love Wes. I think Wes is the bomb. Right? So Wes eventually developed a pretty nice sized callus on his thumb, which is something I can do too. And he used it to play all of his lines. And I like doing that. I don't run into problems as quickly. And I can play all the stuff I like to without having to worry about the pick exploding my hand. So I would say adapt Wes's technique for yours. If you have EDS or a hand that can't really hold a pick that well or anything like that. There are plenty of guitarists who do this and who play with just their hands in a bunch of different disciplines. Wes, of course, was a jazz guitarist, but other guitarists right now who use their digits as a way to articulate their ideas include like Tosin Abasi of Animals as Leaders and folks like that. So even if holding the pick is like, that's just not happening, there's totally tons of guitar sounds, guitar players you can emulate who don't need to do that. While we're here, I'm going to play you a little bit of my arrangement of You Are My Sunshine, not only because it's good, but so that you can see how to use your fingers, your right and your left hand technique, in a way that makes sense when you have EDS. All right, cool. Now let's talk about upright bass. The rules for electric bass and guitar are pretty much the same, except you're not going to be trying to use your thumb on electric bass. You're going to be using your first 2 fingers, or if you're particularly fancy, or Matt Garrison, first 4 fingers. So, upright bass. Not entirely different of an instrument. Lower 4 strings, or 4 strings rather, are the same as the lowest 4 strings on guitar, just down the octave. On guitar, you have a lot of play over what action you might have, and it's pretty easy to take it into such and such a person and have the action adjusted. On upright bass, you may have less of a choice. So the guitar I was just playing has pretty low action, which I highly recommend for a bunch of reasons. But this bass has relatively high action, which is really good because you want to project, and this helps. Now, having high action will cause some stuff in the left hand that we have to take a look at in a little bit, but for right now we'll just start with right hand technique. So here we are, down at the right hand. You notice I've got a little marker put on this instrument, and that's so I have a good place to place my thumb. Right? This is just good standard bass technique, but this is so you can get maximum sound with minimum effort. You can see my finger really kind of going nuts here. But that's perfectly okay. No tension's being put on it. It just happens to be going out because of some of the tension I'm putting on my hand. You want the force to communicate all the way to your lats, right? On guitar, we could totally get away with just using the muscles in our forearm. Strings are thicker, different instrument. We're going to want to use our lats. So the weight of the arm is what's going to pull the strings, not the fingers. If I do this like I would on electric bass, notice how wimpy the sound is. But if I use the weight of my arm, very different sound, and I would argue better one. An exercise you can do to practice this is something I picked up from an old friend of mine. Letting the weight of the arm be the thing that drives the sound. Thumb in as close to the same place as you can put it every single time. Definitely something I need to work on personally. And generally you're letting the string that's behind the one that you're playing stop your finger. But if you're playing the E string, it's like turning a key. Everyone's going to have their own right hand pizzicato technique, even in jazz, especially in jazz. This is the one that I've developed that works best with EDS. And if you're watching this and you're learning something, you probably have EDS too. So it might be worth your time to see if this works for you. Right. Also, notice that I am not really using the tip of my finger, more the side. This is something that I picked up by watching Ron Carter. Right. It lets me have more. I'm almost playing it with my knuckle, kinda. It lets me have more of that part of my body, a hard part of my body, on the string, as opposed to just operating with the soft part. Again, with EDS, there's nothing wrong with your muscles or bones. It's just the stuff that involves collagen. Thankfully, the mutation that gives rise to EDS does not affect the collagen that is present in the formation of bones, which is very, very lucky. Because if you have that mutation, you get brittle bone disease instead. And I might be 3 foot tall and teaching you how to play piano, because that would make me Michel Petrucciani. So this exercise is great. Different patterns. It might not seem like this is much different, but like also recommend that you get a copy of the Simandl book, Simandl. It's a technique book that focuses on left-hand stuff, but also has just tons of open string exercises before he even has you put your fingers on the fretboard. Or lack of fretboard, I should say. Speaking of Simandl, we're going to move to the left hand now. So here we are, up at the left hand. Remember what I was telling you before about your lats taking on most of the weight or the effort of moving the right hand through the strings? Your lats will also take the majority of the effort for left hand placement and movement. And what this means is that you'll have to figure out how to communicate the force from your fingers, your delicate fingers, through your wrist, which can't be, if you bend your wrist, you're going to shred those tendons. I promise. I promise you're going to shred those tendons. Through your even slightly bent wrist, down to your elbow, which should remain up. If you collapse down, then you can't use those lats anymore. But if you're up, then the lats are ready to get used. Communicate through your arm, down here, down to the muscles on the side of your body. So your lateral muscles. Lats may not actually be the term for it. What do I know? And a great way to start incorporating the hand beyond just normal Simandl stuff is to use that exercise for the right hand and just move up positions in the left. So we're going to start on the G string. 1, 2, 4, just like Simandl says. 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3. And we'll be up at the G. If you wanted to, you could keep going into thumb, but that will be something I cover specifically in a second. So let's go ahead and play that like that. If you wanted to, you could do that all the way up to G without doing the little cheat thing that I just did. Now you can do that on the other strings, and that's something I recommend. So exactly the same thing with the same motion. Just now on the D string. Or the A, or the low E. Each of those shows you what angle you need to get your fingers in so that they're going curving into the instrument and not laying flat on it. Because I can do that, but that's very painful and will eventually deform your hand. Now let's talk about scales and sort of shifting positions. So I'm sure every bass player is perfectly able to play inside first position and it's all fine. But what happens if you have to? Right. Same sort of thing, just making sure that that elbow stays up, the lats are engaged, and that you're not having your fingers take too much of the pressure. Because again, with EDS, that will deform your hand. I've seen it happen. So let's take this 2-octave F major scale. Not only do you have to worry about being in tune and everything, you also have to worry about not crushing your hand under the weight of the forces you're putting it through. However, it can be done. And that actually brings me to my next conversation, which is about double stops. So I like double stops a lot. Because I like Jimmy Garrison a lot. Making sure that your double stops are working well when you have EDS is very important, because it is so tempting to let that hand crush down because it's going to be physically easier in the short term, but in the long term that will destroy your hand. I don't mean metaphorically either. I mean you won't be able to do stuff with it. So if I can get the angle there, look at this. Look at this left hand position. Look at how strong this muscle is right here. That's how I'm able to do that. got muscles really working to hold that together. And to practice that, there are exercises that you can do. I had someone, my friend Evan Levine, try and teach me this one. Or something like it. Just every possible combination of those, of what two fingers can do inside one bass position. And I would recommend asking him for that specific exercise. Tenths. Because Charlie Hayden on Science Fiction will be doing stuff like this. So how do you keep that going? Exactly the same way that you would do the double stops. But I would almost say even this would require specific practice. Instead of sliding my finger up to take advantage of my flexibility, I'm using second finger there. Right? And you can, when you're forming like that, there's one voicing I like on bass. This sort of major 7 voicing. But look what I'm doing. I'm backing up my fourth finger with my third finger. That way I don't have to worry about like crushing or not. And that should hold true for all the string stuff. Making sure that finger 4 is supported by the lower 3 fingers. In fact, here's a little exercise you can do to make sure that you're checking it. Kind of like the caterpillar on guitar. So this looks easy, but what happens when you do it in reverse? Are you still backing up those fingers? Right? Even though finger 1's not down, should be. I'm still backing up my pinky with the lower digits. What happens if you skip one? Right? Is it still working the same way? Overall, you should be building a consistent technique that allows you to do whatever you want whenever you want to do it, but also takes your body into account and the things that it can't do well support the weight of its own force. And what that basically looks like on bass is making sure that your Simandl stuff is completely under control and that you have an arch in your hand, or arch in your fingers, and that this group of muscles is really doing its job whenever it can. To wrap up the bass portion, I'm going to do another arrangement of You Are My Sunshine, but this time in the key of G, which is where Ron Carter does it. So, hopefully, that was illuminating for you. The concepts that I showed you today will either help you play your instruments better or play them again, even though your fingers might do this. If there happens to be something else that you're interested in, or another instrument family, let me know. I play everything you can find in a normal American band room through my work at the park. So I'd say, ask me questions. I figured out how to do all of it with this body that I happen to have. So you might as well learn from my mistakes. As always, take care of yourself. I'll catch you soon.